Garden railroads are the largest growing segment of the model railroad industry.
Garden railroading is a century and a quarter old. The first garden railroads were just outdoor model railroads, and over time people got the notion of integrating the garden with the railroad.
It's a lot of fun. It's a great way to marry something, I guess a hobby that's great fun for a lot of people, railways, with wonderful plant material.
A garden railroad is always a reflection of its builders. Paul Bussey has a background in landscape architecture and developed his own techniques and developed the use of materials that is different from what most people use.
Paul's gardens are distinctive. They're unbelievable that you can usually tell which one he's helped design or helped create.
Because he creates a three-dimensional living sculpture with plants, with all of the trestles, and with the trains.
For 55 years, I've loved toy trains and played with trains and grew up with trains. So the hobby of model railroading has always been a favorite of mine. I also loved gardening, so I'm really doing just what I love to do from the very beginning. Garden to me is like a wonderful still life. It's, a three-dimensional still life, but the trains bring it to life. When we conceive a garden railway, first I really look at the function of how I want people to look at this. Right now we're standing in the middle of my driveway in Alexandria, Kentucky. We're not at the Botanical Gardens yet. We actually frame everything you see ahead of time. Well, before we arrived in Atlanta, we actually built all the buildings. We built all the bridges and the framework, so we really are arriving there with this huge skeleton of track work, buildings, and actually about 10 tons of cedar slabs. Our first step is actually to get the right-of-ways established, literally creating this skeleton of track work. The whole idea is at the end of what we do is that it looks like the mountains and all the streams and everything were there first, and the trains had worked themselves in among that. At this point, I'm actually standing at the waterfall. So approximately this track level, you're going to have the illusion as if this mountain back here, the stream's coming down, and then hits the free fall where it actually free falls here. And when it splashes here, there'd be kind of a big whirlpool of water that rushes towards this bridge.
In a small space, he can have a whole lot going on. So he can have 3 different layers of trains running and in and out and waterfalls. And so he deals with vertical space as well as horizontal space. And I think that's one of his greatest talents, is dealing with vertical space better than anyone, because he's not trying to be realistic. He's just trying to create that feeling of trains running and things moving and in a living world.
We try to make it almost like a maze that you're going through, and you're, depending on where the train is, you might be drawn this way when the train's going across, you might be drawn this way with this train going around. People look at my plans and they can look awful sketchy, but the trains do have to function correctly with radiuses and grades and things, but beyond that, we love to just create it on the spot. Does it still look good? To me, to put it on a computer and turn it into a CAD program or something that'd take way too long. The imagination works a lot faster than a computer.
We have about 1/4 mile of track. We have 7 trains running through that 1/4 mile track. The footprint for the exhibit is approximately 3,200 square feet. We have 20 bridges in this exhibit, which is more than Applied Imagination has ever done in any installation before.
One of them will actually be 60 feet across the water before it gets to the other side. It might be made out of willow, but it actually does function, because we've tested them and putting approximately a 1,000-pound load on a bridge like that. Part of that strength comes from these high-tension cables here, aircraft cables. And we also put an arch in the bridge, so we are literally using the true engineering structure of what a bridge would do. When the bridge is set up, we all hang from it. So we figured if you can't get any more people hanging from it, then it'll never have a load greater than that. These are what's called trestle bents, which would be the uprights that would hold. And that's actually the most efficient way to build things, is have support directly under the track. Another first is a floating garden railway, filled with landscaping, little station scene here, lighthouse scene down there. We've got 45 cubic feet of foam are underneath this, so there's, when this pond starts to fill here, hopefully this island comes up with it. Everything we're using train-wise is actually commercially available today. We're blending the the best of 4 or 5 major manufacturers that have entered this whole world of G-scale. So we've got, beautiful passenger trains from the 50s. We've got mixed freight trains that you would see today. We have trains that have the old billboard boxcars because of all their color and character. And of course, we have the old steam trains.
All right. Love that sound. Music to our ears to hear these trains running.
We are definitely taking advantage of the digital world when it comes to the sounds. You might be standing on a bridge and you're going to hear the full whistles, and they're going to be the correct whistles for that engine and everything, the steam sounds and all that.
What I've got is a magnet. I put this magnet. Anyway, it'll trigger the bell or the whistle depending on which side of the track we put it on.
Our track plans, even though they look complicated, each train will stay in its own track and not bother the other trains. So, it's a relatively simple operation. It's pretty much a straight transformer and track.
But the person visiting the railroad will not see this. They will actually have no idea that this is in here, but this is where we keep all the train controls, and store backups, and a lot of the trains sitting around here, be the ones that'll be on the tracks here. I'm standing just above that control room. This is sort of like behind the scenes at a theater. From the seats, you're gonna see this wonderful scene, but you step behind the curtains here and all of a sudden you're gonna see all these supports, and you realize at this point that these mountains are actually empty.
None of the tracks are the same length, so between variable speeds, lengths of tracks and everything, the chance of the 2 trains crossing or looking just like they did a few minutes before would be extremely rare. So, you could look at it for hours.
His use of plants is phenomenal. He's such an artist that he uses color, he uses textures.
We're taking a medium of plants and visually interpreting them into all these wonderful fun shapes that everybody, when they look at it, turn it into this sort of magic world. But a lot has to do with how we've placed the plants. You take a dwarf Japanese maple, hang it over a railroad station or something, and suddenly it's a great old elm tree that, 100 years old and is shading the platform. So it's a matter of, we've introduced this illusion of scale. So real plants, are becoming interpreted as if they were big plants in a small world.
The great word dwarf. We try to get the truly dwarf things in there, and a lot of ground covers, smaller things that flower, a lot of different textures of plants work really well, but it's all in that small scale.
I love to go to the nurseries and find unusual things, different things, and actually some of the more common things as well. Blend those together right on the spot, because you got to feel it.
Some of the things he chose actually maybe the consumer wouldn't choose, or the homeowner, because maybe they're one-sided or they lean in a certain direction. And they're perfect for him to use to give maybe a house a certain scale or drape over the part of a roof. So he looks at the shape and the character of the plant.
We have this whimsical license. We often add color and strong color to really have the great textures of drawing your eye in. And
little moss here, little moss in these cracks, a little plant hanging out here. Needed some kind of vine or something growing up the side here. Shoot, that'll look like it's been there for 100 years.
There's no set rules. Throw away that tape measure. That anybody gets hung up on that, they're just missing the point.
I think gardeners appreciate the buildings, especially because they recognize all the parts that he's used to make those buildings. You're just blown away that staircases are made out of, corkscrew willow, and that roofs are made out of large leaves, and that turrets are made out of pine cone scales. I mean, little tiny pieces of natural materials he uses to put these together, and that's part of the magic, is just trying to figure out how did he build that? How did he put all these things together? How did he come up with the idea?
To interpret everything through plant material seemed like the ideal medium, for this setting. And all we're really doing is forming them into the general building shape and letting your eyes see this plant material and magically seeing all this detail.
How much detail and time goes into each one of the buildings It is, to think about how long it takes to make each one, is just mind-blowing to me.
Well, we gather materials. Most of them come just walking through the woods. You know, we fortunately have 12 acres here that is slowly getting stripped. You know, we're always looking out for the dead tree with bark falling off, or, you know, the unusual seed pod or something.
It's kind of dangerous actually to even ride down the road with him, because he says, oh, we could use that for a roof or a bridge trestle. But people might consider weeds or useless plant parts he looks at as a piece of art.
And we have learned over time that you might use a seed pod or a seed or something, but it shouldn't have like a full acorn with a nut in it. Squirrels are going to attack and steal the buildings. One thing we do that's quite different than a model railroad, you know, they're stay exactly to scale, like, you know, O gauge might be 1/4 inch scale. We're roughly the world a 1/2 inch scale, but that's really, we leave off from there because, you know, small buildings, we might exaggerate those. Big buildings will be scaled down because scale really is in the perspective of where you're at and where you're looking. The other thing, of course, that's going to make it quite unique is a suggestion of the Atlanta skyline. You know, we create these buildings out of the plant material, but, you know, the bottom line is to really make them feel right. We've obviously left out hundreds of windows and things, but, you know, that feeling of these vertical lines, the niche corners, and especially the lattice top, you know, feels exactly like the real building.
And it really is a wow to see these big Atlanta skyscrapers, but at the same time see how well they fit into the garden.
It's absolutely magical when he's finished with it. It takes adults back to their childhood, and it is right in a child's element. It kind of hits on so many things that people find fun at a really deep level.
Your sense of reality gets distorted as you kind of get pulled into the exhibit experience. It's like being drawn into another world.
He goes way beyond reality. He goes up, he goes out. He uses things totally out of scale sometimes. He makes them three-dimensional. You become part of the railroad. It's not just standing there watching it, you're in it, you're part of it. It's an active garden rather than a passive thing for a lot of people.
It's been great to watch it go from a pile of dirt and mulch that we had to this wonderful three-dimensional exhibit in motion. And then you get busy following the trains and seeing where they're going. Then you begin to explore the plants that are around the trains, and you can just spend hours in the exhibit. It's just so much fun.
The hardest thing is keeping the kids from climbing on and grabbing on to the trains because they're so excited.
A different one come.
And the adults are amazed. I mean, really, most people have never seen such a thing or even heard of it.
Men gravitate toward the train. They look at the train. They ask what scale the train is in. They ask about the track. They ask about the far more technical aspect of things. And the wife is looking at the garden aspect of it. And it's amazing to see the difference.
Paul has such a passion for what he does. He wants to make it everything it can possibly be. And each one of his exhibits is unique to the setting, to the city, to the garden. He's an artist that way.
Well, my favorite time of day is at dusk, where you've lost the intensity of light and you're starting to get kind of that darker shadow, and of course all the buildings are lit.
It'll just be a magical experience at night, and I think a different experience than you get during the day. And I think to be in the exhibit and see the Atlanta buildings lit at night and then look beyond and see the real Atlanta skyline at night will be a great experience.
55 years.
all about connecting to people. And little people are the most important, aren't they? I mean, you know, little people are going to become the adults that make all the decisions about our world in the future. And I know a train exhibit is a stretch, but it's really not. They were in the garden, experiencing the garden, and had that, oh, wow, happening. Someday they may grow up to be better stewards environmentally because they came to this beautiful garden and they got touched.
I think that's the excitement that just keeps driving me on.